Hi, everyone. April Berg here. Welcome to Kitchen Conversations. I am very excited that you have joined us on this hot summer day in the Puget Sound, Pacific Northwest. Not quite as hot as yesterday, but it's still pretty darn hot. I am so excited to have our guest today come to us from Bothell to talk about LGBTQ youth homelessness. I am excited to welcome to my kitchen, but to Kitchen Conversations, Jenne Alderks, and she is running for Bothell City Council, and she is also a passionate community activist. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Jenne so that she can introduce herself and let you know some of the great stuff she's done.
Thanks so much, April. It's really good to be here. And by way of introduction, my name is Jenne Alderks. My pronouns are she, they, and I am a parent of 3 kids on the autism spectrum. And just recently, even since I've announced that I'm running for office, that all 3 of them have come out to me somewhere in what we call the rainbow spectrum. And it's one of those things that I knew growing up that there was just, the odds are it's possible to have a kid who is gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and so I felt like I was prepared at least to respond appropriately. Also being in the rainbow spectrum myself, I've known since high school that I very well could marry someone other than a member of the opposite sex, but that was before marriage was legal. So I did marry my husband, and we've been married for 17 years. And in that time, I have a kitten attacking my foot. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no.
There might be a cat that walks by.
And we welcome cats and kids.
That's right. They might show up. So in that time, we came to the Puget Sound area for a PhD program. He has a doctorate in psychology, and in that time, I got a master's in education from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I became a doula, which means that I support families who are giving birth to their babies as a birth doula and a postpartum doula, and that meant that I've been serving a very diverse clientele over the last 10 years, from the immigrant population, BIPOC, even homelessness. And that is something that I brought a trauma-informed perspective to, having experienced a traumatic childbirth myself. And so I actually started out community organizing around trauma for moms. And I was involved in an organization called Solace for Mothers. And as I'm kind of a, if you see a need, take the lead kind of person. And so I was, serving my local community, involved in local birth activism, but just seeing the intersections with economic injustice and racial injustice meant that I became part of an effort to address racial discrimination and oppression in maternity care. Got involved in that, and then, of course, the Black Lives Matter movement just kind of welled up, and I needed to be a responsive parent and make sure that my kids understood what was going on. I grew up Unitarian and then converted to Mormonism, so I get if that doesn't make any sense to people, because it's a surprise to me too. I just knew as a young child that we were going to have another civil rights movement in my lifetime. I hoped it would be in my lifetime, and I hoped that I could be there and be a part of it, and respond appropriately when that moment arose. And so that came about in 2020. And after George Floyd was murdered by police in Minneapolis, a number of members of my community here in Bothell got together. Savannah Jackson is a local activist and owner of the coffee shop Mix that just opened in Mill Creek.
Yes, she's right near my house.
I know you have the easy ride there.
Yes.
I'm so sad that Bothell didn't get her. But I'm hoping maybe they get a second location at some point nearby. Back in 2020, Savannah Jackson started Anti-Racist Communities Bothell, and just with my experience in working with homelessness, having kids who are with developmental disabilities, and having, just the life I lived with my father experiencing mental health crisis as a child. When I was a child, I just knew that I needed to be involved in the public safety and community response conversation. And I figured I could use my white privilege as best as I could to make some movements in that direction. I also joined the Planning Commission last year before all the protests started, and thought that maybe someday I could run for city council when my kids were older. But then there was this movement, there was this moment where I knew that we needed community leaders who could speak from and understand the racial justice lens, and who could look at things from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. So I stepped forward. I'm so grateful to have other candidates who stepped forward with me, Han Tran and Rami Al-Kabra, who are running alongside me here in Bothell. And together we are hoping to prove that we can reshape public policy in a way that is equitable and inclusive to all people who live in Bothell. So that's me.
Awesome. That is so awesome. And I just, listening to you talk about yourself, introduce yourself. And for those of you watching at home, this is why I ask guests to introduce themselves, because the passion that you talk with, and talking about your experience, your lived experience that you're going to bring into the new role as a city council member in Bothell. And I'm just going to name it and claim it that you're going to get there along with your compatriots, who I know and support as well. And I'm just excited to see what's going to happen in my neighboring city. But to your point, I'm happy that the folks at Mixed Coffee decided to open up down the street from my house, because me and my family have been patronizing them probably a little bit more than we expected. So that said, though, you did say a couple things I want to unpack. First, let's talk about pronouns. And here at Kitchen Conversations, you've seen us now for this is our second season. We always put up the names of myself and our guests, and I haven't been doing pronouns. And I just want to point out the fact that we're doing it today. It's not just a today thing. We should have been doing this all along, because it's the right thing to do for inclusivity and to make everyone feel welcome. So my pronouns are up. My guests, Jenny's pronouns are up, and we're going to keep doing this for all of our guests to increase inclusivity right here in my kitchen. But the other thing I want to ask you about, because you talked about your family coming out, different ways of coming out. We have a lot of families who have kiddos who are on that rainbow spectrum, as you so wonderfully coined that term, or maybe you didn't coin it, but I love hearing you talk about it. And so for families, how should they respond when their kids, when their young ones come out to them and tell them that they are on the rainbow spectrum, that they are a member of the LGBTQ community?
Well, and this is something that, for me, it's really important to remember that gay people have always existed, and gay people, people who are LGBT, are a fact of life. And we live in a society that often wants to pretend that it's made up or invented, and that this isn't really people's lived experience and their truth, and that how they were created. Just recently, my kids and I subscribed to the Equal Opportunity book box. I don't know if you've seen that around, but we got a book from Karamo Brown from Queer Eye. And the name of the book is I Am Perfectly Designed.
Awesome.
And he is a Black gay father. And so he is telling his child that he is, that each child is made perfectly designed just as they are. And that includes being born gay, straight, bisexual, lesbian, transgender, intersex. And so it's important for us to, I think, come from a perspective and that is grounded in fact and understanding that there is nothing made up and there is nothing invented about being born different. And so it's really important that children, for their own survival, their own belief in themselves and their desire to live, that they have an accepting and affirming adult in their life. The Trevor Project shows that just one accepting adult can reduce the risk of suicide attempt by an LGBTQ youth by 40%. And that 40% of queer kids over the last year have seriously considered attempting suicide when they feel they feel unaccepted and not included within their world. And sometimes, our culture can be very, very exclusive and very rejecting of anything outside of the gender binary, anything outside of heteronormative.
Yeah,
so for parents, it's just really important to love your kids, to know that you gave birth to that child, and that child is made how they're made, and so love your kid.
Exactly. Well, and I think that's important, and for you to say it that way, and for parents to love their kids, because when that love doesn't happen, when a child comes out, it really is a failure point that leads to our topic today, which is LGBTQ youth homelessness. And it's rampant. It's the data shows, I mean, to your point, and the data points that the Trevor Project puts out, and it's horrendous. And so can you talk to me a little bit about what happens, how that gets, when a parent fails their child in that way, how does that lead to homelessness?
Yeah. Well, I want to affirm to families that, especially since I've spent the last 20 years of my life in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I don't know if I'm just some like sleeper agent or what at this point, but
sleeper agent. Oh my word.
But I knew when I joined the church that there was a kind of a role for me to play when it came to helping advance the rights and inclusion of LGBTQ people. And so when it comes to like some of the parents that I've been my co-religionists, oh gosh, I may have lost where I was going with that one, but
you said
just the failure
agent.
point. Oh,
yeah. I know that's where you got me.
Well, yeah. Is that there's this belief that parents fail, that they have failed somehow as a parent when their child comes out as gay because they're not fitting the heteronormative gender binary, and that's not the failure, right? We can't decide who our children are going to be, how they were born, or who they become. The only thing that we can decide is how we love our kids. And so the failure comes from not being able to affirm. And I am very having been a kid who has been in crisis. And so my crisis was different. My parents were, my parents were affirming in the sense that I never had to come out to my dad because he died before then. And he had so many struggles with his mental health challenges that when I was calling for crisis help, it was because he was suicidal. And so I've grown up around suicidality in that sense, and needing to know how to appropriately respond and get people the support that they need. And the answer is not police. Police are not equipped to respond to people who are, threatening suicide, wanting to harm themselves. And here in the North Shore area, in the North Sound, we have a program that I think has a tremendous potential to help in these situations where, say you have a kid who has come out to their parents and their parents immediately want to reject and say, you can't live here anymore. Like you need to change who you are. And I would very much like to see those kids know that they can call RADAR. The RADAR program stands for Resource Awareness, De-escalation, and Referral. And they are social workers embedded within our local police departments. They serve 5 jurisdictions, and see if I can get them all off the top of my head. Kenmore, Kirkland, Shoreline, Bothell, and Lake Forest Park. I believe that's all of them. And so currently, RADAR serves those 5 jurisdictions 40 hours a week. So we have 9 to 5 business hours. And I know from my own lived experience that crisis doesn't usually happen during business hours. It usually happens evenings and weekends when families are together.
Yes.
And so I very much would like to see, and so that's something that I plan to work on as a city council member, to see RADAR be available evenings, weekends, if not 24/7, and how we can work together as jurisdictions to expand access to that program. so that when a kid is threatened with being, removed from their house, that they can call for help. And just imagine with me what that would be like. This is a kid who's scared, terrified, wondering how they're going to make it and how they're going to get going in life without their family. And the data says that 22% of King County homeless people between the ages of 12 and 25 are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, or queer. Or, so we have, almost a quarter of our homeless youth are experiencing this crisis in their lives. And what if we could prevent it through a skilled and trained facilitator who can de-escalate and provide resources to that kid immediately? Maybe, and I hope, and I believe in the power of, social workers and de-escalation, people who are trained in de-escalation, to convince that family to keep the kid in the house and not go on the streets. So we could prevent homelessness with access to crisis response. Or if it's just not feasible, the family is just, it's untenable for them for whatever reason. They just can't get themselves to the point of being able to say, yes, I can love my kid and accept them in my home. Then you immediately have a professional who can, instead of sending that child to the street, can send that child to resource and referral. And that could be shelter, that could be foster care, that could be, whatever needs to happen, or whatever safe place that child can be in, so that we can actually prevent a kid who did not choose to be gay, did not choose to be queer, from being rejected from their family and out on the street.
Absolutely. No, and thank you for drawing that line, because that was where I wanted to go with this, right? So where the failure is not the failure. Parents, like you said, they think, oh, my kid comes out, this something. No, the failure is you not loving your kid, right? And so you just drew us a straight line from a parent not loving, accepting their child, not loving them where they are, to homelessness. And that line, it sounds like, with programs like the Radar program, which I will tell you truthfully, I did not know about. I'm in a neighboring city. We don't have that program. I'm taking notes. I'm in my kitchen taking notes, going, this is powerful stuff, because we have to break that cycle. And our homeless youth are overwhelmingly LGBTQ. And if we could, to your point, have some type of intervention with that family before they fail that child, that could significantly decrease the amount of youth, the amount of LGBTQ youth who are homeless. So I can't say enough how lucky the city of Bothell is to have you wanting, doing the service that you've done and wanting to serve further and more and bigger and better. And I'm hoping that some of that good stuff comes our way down here in Mill Creek and in Snohomish County, because all the cities you named are King County. So I wish we had that program here. And so I guess, for another thing with homelessness, right? Whether we're talking about our LGBTQ youth, or we're talking about any of our homeless populations, two words come up, and I just want to see where you go with these words: marginalization and criminalization. And so we're talking about kids, we're talking about youth. And so is a program like Radar, will that end that cycle of marginalizing and criminalizing homelessness?
It has the power and potential to. Absolutely, it does. So often when we, there's a kid we weren't able to help, right? We're going to just follow the logical step, right? Of, this is a queer kid who's on the street, and that has an interaction with police. And historically, our response has been, and let's say that this is a queer kid of color, because 3 out of 5 young people who are homeless in our area are kids of color. And so you have that intersectionality of, Black trans lives matter, right?
Exactly.
And,
Exactly.
Black gay lives matter. And so you have these intersecting factors that have historically led to marginalization and criminalization. You have a homeless person who, instead of receiving, resource and referral and access to housing, would be sent to prison, and charged with a crime instead. And radar is actually designed, that's specifically the purpose, to encounter somebody who, the technical term in the literature is experiencing behavioral health crisis. And that can be drug abuse, that can be substance abuse, homelessness. And instead of contacting a police officer who then is likely, they have few tools available to them besides arrest, is able then to access, contact a navigator. So a navigator is what the radar program calls their professionals that are sent out and dispatched. And so a navigator is then able to reach out to that person and provide them with resources and referrals that can help them get off the streets and into temporary, and then on to permanent housing.
That's awesome.
And so that's really what it's designed for, right? That instead of criminalizing somebody with a drug problem, let's talk about trauma for a minute. The trauma of being rejected from your family, the trauma of feeling unloved and unwelcomed and unwanted, and some of the internalized feelings of self-loathing that can come along with that, right? And this is very well documented in the LGBTQ community, especially when people are coming from communities that are not affirming and welcoming. That trauma then makes people have a higher risk of substance abuse and addiction problems. The percentage that sticks in my mind is 4,560% more likely to be addicted to drugs having experienced childhood trauma. And that's not causation, but that is have you ever heard of a correlation stronger than that?
Yeah, no, and that's important to point out that correlation. Because that's huge. And I will say, with the radar program and it being a navigator program, I think the important thing that you do and that your voice is bringing is the impact it can have on our LGBTQ youth homelessness. And so we do have navigator programs in our county, in Snohomish County, and across the state. But I think it's going to take advocates and leaders and activists really to point out to the correlation and the impact potential for positive impact for these youth in particular. So thank you for kind of bringing those two pieces of it together. The other thing I kind of wanted to touch on just briefly before we get to my last question is Bothell this year, this Pride Month, did something that they've never done before. Can you tell our listeners, our viewers, what that was?
Yeah. So Bothell raised the pride flag at City Hall and at local city parks for the first time ever. And that came about from members of the community who, just were listening to LGBTQ people like myself who said, I see Kenmore doing it and I see Snohomish County doing it, but what about Bothell? Is Bothell going to, take that symbol and raise it above our city with all of the conversations that we've had about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that this last year, our anti-racist communities, Bothell, were successful in lobbying city council to fund a DEI consultant who is going to look at all city policy and each department of the city to find how we can improve equity and inclusion in all of our city programs. And one thing that we could do, it's a no-brainer, is to raise the flag. And so it was really meaningful for me and for my family to go over to City Hall and see the flag be raised for the first time.
That's awesome.
We also had our first Pride rally in Bothell, hosted by a local bakery, Apathy Bakery, and shout out to Danielle Hamilton for putting that on.
That is great. Oh my gosh, it's good to know. Symbols do matter, and it leads to conversations, and it shows affirmation, and it really just shows love in the community. So I'm happy to hear that was able to be done. Well, my last question for all of my guests on Kitchen Conversations this season is moonshots. And so when it comes to LGBTQ youth homelessness specifically, what would be that moonshot, that thing that seems so impossible but is so necessary to happen in this space?
Yeah, well, to answer that question, I'm going to paraphrase our Bothell chief of police, who said, radar is an excellent program. It has so much potential to do so much good. But the biggest challenge that navigators face is that they're unable to access the referrals and the community services needed to really help to get people access to what they need, right? It ends up becoming multiple points of contact as people are waiting for access to shelter and getting off of waiting lists for mental health services and all of these things. And we really need to have a community support system that all works together. So for me, my moonshot is a combination of universal mental health care, universal health care, and housing first programs.
Wow.
And so I'm talking, state level. So hello, Representative Berg.
I hear you. As soon as you said that moonshot, I went, it's become so obvious that this is no longer, on a wish list, right? It's a necessity that we need to keep fighting for it. And I tell you, with leaders like you, those are the moonshots that become real, right? No matter what we do at the state level, it takes city leaders and leaders in the community to really implement them. So, universal behavioral health services and housing first. You said it.
I would add that any mental health services needs to have holistic trauma therapies that recognize that the trauma is not just an emotional experience, it is a body experience. And that, like the researcher in the book, The Body Keeps the Score, is that we internalize our traumas in ways that lead to long-term health effects. If you're familiar with the research around adverse childhood experiences, that these are kids, right? We're talking about LGBTQ youth who have adverse childhood experiences that are significant enough that they are going to lead to long-term physical and mental health challenges.
Absolutely.
And so that is why universal health care is so important. But the mental health care aspect is a necessary part of it. And to get even more granular about it, those trauma therapies have to be holistic and have to be able to provide that body healing too.
Yeah. No, you said it. Oh my gosh, we could talk all day, Jenne. This has been an amazing conversation. You are incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly eloquent, and incredibly needed in this moment. So thank you for coming on Kitchen Conversations and having this conversation. I think it's going to be one of many. So I'm kind of going to ask you to think about coming back, because I think as time goes on, we're going to have to start talking about how to take those moonshots and implement them in our community. So thank you for this. This has been an awesome conversation. For those of you watching at home and listening to us, I just want to make a couple of programming notes. We have a holiday week coming up, so we're going to do an in case you missed it episode. I'm extraordinarily excited. Our episode will drop on July 6th. It's going to be a conversation between myself and Christy Flynn of Inspirata Life Coaching, talking about resilience, and what a wonderful topic for this 4th of July weekend. With everything going on in our world, I think resilience is something that we all could just know a little bit more about. So hopefully you find that conversation informative. We will be back live on July 13th with an amazing conversation between myself and the podcast host, DB Crema, who does the podcast United States of Race. That's going to be one you're going to double circle around your calendar. Make sure July 13th, 3 p.m. you are on your social media channels to hear that conversation. DB Crema is an amazing author and podcast host, and so you're not going to want to miss her. I hope you all stay very, very hydrated out there. Have a wonderful holiday, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Thank you for joining us on Kitchen Conversations.